So these are Tigray people. So this guy that I have right here, okay, this guy is a typical Tigray-looking person. Also, almost completely would pass as an Egyptian.
Tigrayans aren't Egyptian. Their genetic components are vastly different from that of Egyptians. Over the past 2,000 years, Egypt has experienced a gradual sub-Saharan influx, particularly in the south, though the overall gene pool remains predominantly West Eurasian. This influx was neither uniform nor large-scale. Nubians, Sudanese, and other admixed groups moved into Egypt only periodically. During trans-Saharan and Red Sea slave trade networks, small migrations introduced sub-Saharan ancestry into the population. All of these did not replace or dominate the indigenous Egyptian gene pool. Ancient as well as modern Egyptians are predominantly Eurasian. Therefore, only today could Tigrayans blend into Egypt, given the sub-Saharan influx the country has experienced over the past 2,000 years. This is because genome-wide studies show Tigrayans, like other East African Semitic-speaking groups, carry a roughly equal mix of indigenous East African and West Eurasian ancestry.
I think this is probably one of the more borderline kind of Asiatic-looking Tigrayans, but
And there it is, Asiatic-looking East Africans. Just 6 minutes earlier in this debate, he flatly denied any outside Eurasian introgression, falsely insisting light skin and narrow noses were merely adaptations to high altitude. Now, in a complete 180, he suddenly admits Eurasian presence in East Africa with his Eurasian Asiatic-looking Tigrayan remark. Didn't he also falsely assert Levantine Eurasians had a black phenotype and black skin? Yes, however, he has now slipped up and admitted otherwise. He keeps going back and forth on this. The lies, the contradictions, the constant flip-flopping, this is Afrocentrism in a nutshell. They bend their arguments whichever way the wind blows. Never consistent, never honest, only scrambling to protect their narrative. He had no problem acknowledging Levantine phenotype until the Nuarat genome was published. Let's recall.
if we look at the bottom, we have this clearly Levantine man. He's clearly a kind of Eurasian or Asiatic man. You can see it's in his.
Oh, yes. He knee-jerk reacted, he slipped up. He acknowledges that the Tigrayan individual doesn't sport the typical black phenotype and black skin he previously championed as part of Eurasian phenotype. No, we're not dealing with any black people across the Levant, Arabia, or parts of Africa. Have a foot in mouth pie. You earned it, champ. If Tigrayans, who are half Eurasian, can look Eurasian, why can't Eurasians in Eurasia look Eurasian? Why can't ancient Egyptians who were fully Eurasian look Eurasian? And why can't those Eurasians who settled Egypt while other Eurasians who traversed through Egypt into Nubia and East Africa pass on their genes? Hence what he labelled an Asiatic-looking Tigrayan. At one glance, he certainly knew to draw a distinction between this Tigrayan and others who are not so Eurasian-looking. The Eurasian genetic component had already reached into deep sub-Saharan East Africa as early as 3500 BC. The only plausible route for the Levantine Chalcolithic component to have introgressed into regions like Kenya and Tanzania is through Egypt, one of the three primary entry points for Eurasians entering Africa. And since Eurasians reached as far south as Kenya, it logically follows that they had no problem settling Egypt, and all the evidence confirms this. Haplogroup E was absent from Africa until the arrival of Eurasians, and lineages such as R, J, T, G, and others were likewise introduced by Eurasians. Similarly, any mitochondrial DNA outside of L except L3 in Africa likewise traces back to Eurasian origins. And if ancient Eurasians could reach Kenya and Tanzania, why not central Nubia during the early Neolithic? Afrocentrics will avoid this data at all costs. What a hard pill to swallow, or choke on. Structure and ancestry patterns of Ethiopians in genome-wide autosomal DNA 2021. Numerous and varied admixture events have been inferred in Ethiopian groups, for example, involving sources related to present-day groups in West Eurasia and North Africa. with inferred dates spanning a few hundred to more than 4,500 years ago. Using motor and other aDNA from Kenya and Tanzania, Prendergast et al. Infer that some East African Afro-Asiatic speaking groups, potentially including Ethiopian groups, descend from a mixture occurring roughly 4,000 years ago between a motor-like source and a group previously mixed between sources related to present-day North Africans and Levantines and the Nilo-Saharan speaking Dinka from Sudan, using 160 to 650-year-old samples from the pastoral Iron Age. They further infer that this at least three-way admixed group subsequently intermixed with a group similar to Dinka roughly 2,200 years ago, and that some Nilo-Saharan speakers descend from this at least four-way admixed population. Now let's address the Tigray population of Ethiopia. In this study, two assays consisting of 46 AM indels and 31 AM SNPs were typed in a Tigray population sample from northern Ethiopia. Structure analysis showed that the Tigray population is characterized by a strong, roughly 50% non-African genetic component shared with European and Middle Eastern populations. The intermediate position of the Tigray sample between sub-Saharan African and European Middle Eastern reference population samples was confirmed by principal component analysis. Maternal ancestry in northern Ethiopian populations, including Tigrayans, is dominated by African L haplogroups, which account for roughly 60% of lineages. The remaining 40% derive from Eurasian-associated haplogroups, primarily M1 and subclades of N. These Eurasian lineages reflect prehistoric migrations across the Bab el-Mandeb, along with later migration events that shaped the Horn of Africa during the late Holocene. Together, these patterns underscore the combined impact of local continuity and long-distance gene flow on the maternal heritage of Tigrayans. On the paternal side, the Y chromosome of Tigrayan men is overwhelmingly dominated by haplogroup E1b1b, a lineage widely descended from North Africans. Secondary contributions include haplogroup J1, associated with West Asian ancestry, and haplogroup TM184, present at low frequencies, roughly 6 to 7%, reflecting ancient Near Eastern connections into the Horn of Africa. Genetic studies also suggest that an Arabian or Yemeni component entered the Horn of Africa during the late Holocene, roughly 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, likely through movements across the Red Sea from South Arabia during the period associated with the Kingdom of Da'amat and the formative phases of Aksumite civilization. Additionally, ancient DNA research also provides insight into the temporal layering of this ancestry. The roughly 4,500-year-old motor genome from southwestern Ethiopia represents the pre-admixture indigenous component, which is still present in modern Tigrayans but is now diluted by later West Eurasian gene flow, likely entering the Horn of Africa around 3,000 years ago through maritime and overland links with South Arabia. This genome lacked the later West Eurasian admixture present in modern Tigrayans, supporting the view that the Eurasian component entered the region in the late Holocene. With over 20 years of documented DNA studies on East Africans, it's impossible to deny the Eurasian genetic components within these populations. Study after study consistently shows waves of Eurasian migration into Africa across multiple time periods. Meanwhile, Afrocentrics have yet to direct their audience to a single legitimate peer-reviewed study demonstrating a migration of sub-Saharans into Eurasia. Think about that. So when this fraud slipped up and said the Tigrayan was Asiatic-looking, we all know he wasn't talking about someone with black skin and black phenotype like he previously championed in earlier remarks.
This is probably one of the more borderline kind of Asiatic-looking Tigrayans, but
I rest my case.